During my wife's final prenatal checkup, the doctor began trembling while looking at the ultrasound. He pulled me aside. "Leave this hospital now and file for divorce." "What do you mean?" "There's no time to explain. You'll understand when you see this." After seeing what was on the screen, I never went home again. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Jared Attinson had built his life like he built houses, with precision, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. At 38, he owned the most successful construction company in Cedar Falls, employing over 200 people and completing projects across 3 states. His callous hands told the story of a man who started from nothing, working his way up from a day laborer to a millionaire contractor. 15 years ago, he married Angela Moody, the beautiful daughter of the town's former mayor. Angela, now 35, had been the catch of Cedar Falls, blonde, ambitious, and from a family with old money that had long since dried up. The Moody name still carried weight, but the bank accounts had been empty for a generation. Their marriage had seemed perfect to outsiders. Angela played the role of the successful businessman's wife flawlessly, organizing charity events and maintaining their sprawling estate on Maple Ridge. But Jared noticed the changes over the years, the coldness that crept into her touch, the way she'd disappear for hours without explanation, the expensive purchases that didn't match any occasion. Their son, Trevor Attinson, was 14 and the light of Jared's life. The boy had inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's intelligence, excelling in both academics and sports. Jared coached Trevor's baseball team, and they spent every weekend working on projects in the garage, a tradition that Angela had long since stopped participating in. The pregnancy had been a surprise. After 14 years of marriage and multiple miscarriages, they'd assumed Trevor would be their only child. Angela's announcement 6 months ago had been met with mixed emotions. Jared was thrilled, while Angela seemed distant and anxious. Dr. Edun Harrington had been the Attinson family physician for over a decade. A man in his 60s with graying temples and kind eyes. He delivered several babies in Cedar Falls and was known for his gentle bedside manner. He'd been monitoring Angela's pregnancy closely given her history and age. As Jared sat in the waiting room of Harrington's practice, he reflected on how different this pregnancy felt from when Angela carried Trevor. She'd been glowing then, excited about every milestone. This time, she seemed burdened, often staring off in a space with a worried expression she claimed was just hormonal anxiety. Chuck Lake, Jared's business partner and best friend since high school, had noticed the changes, too. Chuck managed the financial side of Attinson Construction, while Jared handled operations. He mentioned seeing Angela around town at odd hours, always checking her phone with a secretive smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Something's not right with her, man," Chuck had said just last week over their usual Friday beer. Sarah saw her at the coffee shop on Main Street, deep in conversation with some guy she didn't recognize. When Sarah waved, Angela practically jumped out of her skin. Jared had dismissed it then, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Angela's behavior had become increasingly erratic. Coming home late from shopping trips with no bags, taking phone calls in private and showing little interest in preparing for the baby's arrival. The morning of the appointment, Angela had been unusually quiet. She'd barely touched her breakfast and seemed nervous, constantly checking her reflection in every mirror they passed. When Jared suggested they grab lunch after the appointment to celebrate their healthy baby, she'd simply nodded without enthusiasm. Now, as he waited for her to emerge from the examination room, Jared tried to push away the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong. He built his success on trusting his instincts, and every instinct was screaming that his perfectly constructed life was about to crumble. Chapter 2. The Web of Deception. Dr. Harrington's examination room felt smaller than usual as Angela lay on the table. Her shirt pulled up to expose her rounded belly. The gel felt cold against her skin, but not as cold as the fear running through her veins. She'd been dreading this appointment for weeks, knowing that modern ultrasound technology would reveal what she'd been desperately trying to hide. The affair had started innocently enough 8 months ago. Marcos Jennings was a smooth-talking real estate developer from the state capital, 32 years old with dark hair and a charming smile that had caught Angela's attention at a charity fundraiser. Unlike Jared, who was always covered in construction dust and talked about building codes and job sites, Marcos wore expensive suits and spoke of international investments and luxury developments. Angelette felt trapped in Cedar Falls for years. While Jared was content building his empire in their small town, she'd always dreamed of something bigger. City life, sophisticated social circles, and the kind of wealth that bought respect rather than earned it through callous hands and honest work. Marcos had pursued her relentlessly after that first meeting. Expensive flowers arrived at the house when Jared was at work. Text messages filled with poetry and promises of a life beyond the confines of small-town America. He'd rented a luxury suite at the Grand View Hotel, 40 minutes outside town, where they'd meet twice a week for passionate encounters that made Angela feel alive in ways she'd forgotten. The pregnancy had been an accident, a moment of carelessness when passion overrode common sense. By the time Angela realized what had happened, it was too late for the quiet solution she'd initially considered. The timeline was wrong. Dangerously wrong. She'd been with Marcos 3 weeks before the last time she'd been intimate with Jared. Dr. Harrington moved the ultrasound wand across her belly, his expression becoming increasingly troubled as he studied the monitor. Angela couldn't see the screen from her position, but she watched his face carefully, noting the way his eyebrows furrowed and his lips pressed into a thin line. "Is everything all right?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The doctor didn't answer immediately. He was calculating dates in his head, cross-referencing the baby's development with the conception timeline Angela had provided months ago. The measurements were off, significantly off. This baby was conceived at least 3 weeks earlier than Angela had claimed. In his 40 years of practice, Dr. Harrington had seen this situation before. The awkward silences, the nervous wives, the trusting husbands sitting in waiting rooms with excited smiles. But he'd never had to deal with a case involving people he'd known for decades. People whose lives would be shattered by what the ultrasound revealed. Meanwhile, Jared sat in the waiting room, scrolling through emails from job sites. Atkinson Construction was in the middle of their biggest project yet, a luxury hotel complex that would establish them as the premier builders in the region. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was building the very type of establishment where his wife had been betraying him. Chuck had texted him earlier about a potential investor for their next big project, someone named Marcos Jennings, who'd been asking questions about their company. Jared made a mental note to look into it later, always interested in expanding their business relationships. Trevor was at school, probably thinking about the baby sister or brother he'd been eagerly anticipating. He'd already started converting the spare room into a nursery, painting cartoon characters on the walls with the same attention to detail he applied to everything else. Jared smiled, thinking about his son's excitement, unaware that the boy's world was about to be shattered along with his own. Dr. Harrington finally set down the ultrasound wand and turned to Angela with grave eyes. "Mrs. Atkinson, we need to discuss the timeline of this pregnancy. Based on the baby's development, conception occurred approximately 26 weeks ago, not 23 as we originally calculated." Angela's face went pale. 3 weeks, the difference that would destroy everything she'd built over 15 years of marriage. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. "I need to speak with your husband," Dr. Harrington said quietly. "This is a conversation that affects both of you, and he deserves to know the truth." As the doctor left to get Jared, Angela closed her eyes and tried to prepare for the end of the world as she knew it. Somewhere across town, Marcos Jennings was probably closing another real estate deal, oblivious to the fact that his secret was about to destroy multiple lives. And in the waiting room, the man who'd loved and trusted her for 15 years was about to learn that his perfect life had been built on a foundation of lies. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Dr. Harrington's hands were trembling slightly as he approached the waiting room. In 4 decades of medical practice, he delivered difficult news countless times, but never had the stakes felt so personal. The Atkinson family had been patient since Trevor was born. And Jared had built the addition to his clinic just 5 years ago. This wasn't just about medical ethics. It was about watching a good man's world collapse. "Mr. Atkinson, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Dr. Harrington's voice was carefully controlled, but Jared immediately noticed the tension. They walked to his office, leaving Angela alone in the examination room. Dr. Harrington closed the door and gestured for Jared to sit, but remained standing himself, pacing slightly as he gathered his thoughts. "Jared, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth." He paused, looking at the man he'd known for years. "The ultrasound shows that the baby's development is inconsistent with the timeline your wife provided. Based on the measurements, conception occurred approximately 26 weeks ago, not 23. Jared's brow furrowed as he processed the information. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means the child couldn't have been conceived during the time frame when you and Angela were together. According to your wife's medical history and our previous discussions, you were away on that construction project in Denver during the conception window." The color drained from Jared's face as the implications hit him like a sledgehammer. The Denver project, he'd been there for 3 weeks in January. The biggest contract Atkinson Construction had ever landed. He'd called Angela every night, missing her terribly, looking forward to coming home to celebrate their success. "Are you absolutely certain?" Jared's voice was barely above a whisper. Dr. Harrington nodded gravely. "I've triple-checked the measurements. There's no doubt about the timing." Jared stood up slowly, his mind racing through the past 6 months. Angela's strange behavior, the secret of phone calls, the distance between them. It all made perfect sense now. He thought about Trevor, probably sitting in algebra class, excited about becoming a big brother to a child that wasn't even his sibling. What do I do now? Jared asked, more to himself than to the doctor. That's not for me to say, Dr. Harrington replied. But Jared, you're a good man. You deserve better than this. Whatever you decide to do, you need to protect yourself and Trevor. As they walked back toward the examination room, Dr. Harrington's advice echoed in Jared's ears. Leave this hospital now and file for divorce. The words had come out before he could stop them, spoken from the heart of man who had watched too many good people suffer from betrayal. But Jared Attinson was not a man who made rash decisions. As they approached the door, he was already calculating, planning. Angela was still lying on the examination table, staring at the ceiling with tears in her eyes. She knew. She'd known all along. Show me, Jared said to Dr. Harrington. Show me the ultrasound. Dr. Harrington hesitated, but turned the monitor toward Jared. There on the screen was undeniable proof. Development measurements that corresponded to a conception date that made Angela's betrayal crystal clear. The baby was healthy and growing normally, but it wasn't his. Angela finally looked at him, her eyes filled with tears and desperation. Jared, I can explain. No, he said quietly, his voice carrying a coldness she'd never heard before. You can't. He studied the ultrasound for another moment, memorizing every detail. Then he looked at his wife, the woman he'd loved and trusted for 15 years, the mother of his son, the person who just destroyed everything he believed about his life. We're going home, Jared said. His voice eerily calm. We're going to have a conversation, and then you're going to tell me exactly who he is. Angela's face went white. Jared, please. Dr. Harrington, Jared interrupted, turning to the older man. Thank you for telling me the truth. Send me copies of everything. The ultrasound, the measurements, the timeline, everything. As they left the hospital, Angela tried repeatedly to speak, but Jared remained silent. His mind was no longer focused on the betrayal itself. He had already processed and accepted that reality. Instead, he was thinking about the future, about Trevor's stability, about his business, about the fact that somewhere in Cedar Falls, a man was walking around thinking he'd gotten away with destroying the Attinson family. Jared Atkinson had built an empire through careful planning and methodical execution. He learned early in life that the key to success wasn't just working hard, it was working smart. As they drove home in silence, Angela crying softly in the passenger seat. Jared was already formulating a plan that would ensure justice was served in ways the legal system never could. The man who'd spent 15 years building a life was about to spend however long it took tearing down the lives of those who betrayed him. And unlike his construction projects, this demolition would be personal, permanent, and absolutely devastating. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Patience. That evening, Jared sat in his home office, a room lined with awards and photographs documenting 15 years of business success and family memories that now felt like elaborate lies. Angela had retreated to their bedroom, claiming a headache while Trevor worked on homework in his room, blissfully unaware that his world had shifted off its axis. Jared opened his laptop and began what he did best, methodical research and planning. His first search was from Marcos Jennings, and it didn't take long to find information about Cedar Falls' newest predator. Jennings Development Group had a sleek website showcasing luxury properties across the state. With Marcos featured prominently as the charismatic CEO who brings dreams to life through visionary real estate development, the man was handsome in a polished way that Jared found immediately repulsive. All white teeth and expensive suits, the kind of person who'd never worked an honest day in his life. Marcos's LinkedIn profile showed him attending the same charity fundraiser where he'd likely met Angela. And his social media presence revealed a man who thrived on attention and luxury. Digging deeper, Jared discovered that Marcos was married to a woman named Samantha Jennings, a prominent attorney in the state capital. They had twin daughters, aged 10, and lived in a $1 million home in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on Jared. This man was destroying multiple families simultaneously. Over the next week, Jared maintained his normal routine while secretly gathering intelligence. He told Chuck that Angela was having pregnancy complications that required rest, which explained her absence from social events and his own distracted demeanor. Chuck, ever loyal, handled extra responsibilities without question. Jared hired a private investigator named Paul Hines, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. Paul was discreet and thorough, exactly what Jared needed. Within 3 days, Paul had documented Angela and Marcos's weekly meetings at the Grandview Hotel, complete with photographs and timestamps that painted a picture of calculated deception. The evidence was damning. Angela had been using money from their joint account to pay for the hotel room. She told Jared she was shopping or visiting her sister Muriel in the next town over, but instead was 40 minutes away in a luxury suite, playing house with a man who was lying to his own family just as thoroughly. But Jared wanted more than just evidence of the affair. He wanted to understand the full scope of the betrayal and ensure his response would be comprehensive and permanent. Through Paul's investigation, he learned that Marcos had been planning to leave his wife and move Angela to the state capital, where they'd start fresh with her child and Angela's settlement from the divorce. The plan revealed Angela's complete betrayal. She hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been planning to destroy their family and take half of everything Jared had built to fund her new life with another man's child. The depth of the deception was staggering. Trevor remained oblivious, excitedly planning for his new sibling and working on the nursery. Watching his son's innocent enthusiasm was torture for Jared, but it also strengthened his resolve. Trevor deserved better than a mother who could lie so thoroughly and a stepfather who was equally dishonest. During this week of investigation, Angela grew increasingly nervous. She could sense Jared's emotional distance, but seemed to believe she could maintain the charade. She even had the audacity to ask him about paint color for the nursery, playing the role of devoted wife while continuing to meet Marcos twice weekly. Jared's respect for his wife evaporated completely as he watched her perform this elaborate deception. The woman he loved was revealed to be a skilled manipulator who could look him in the eyes and lie without hesitation. It was a side of Angela he'd never seen, and it disgusted him more than the affair itself. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the ultrasound revelation, Jared made his decision. He would not confront Angela yet. That would only force her and Marcos to become more careful or flee. Instead, he would execute a plan that would expose their betrayal publicly while ensuring they face consequences far beyond a simple divorce settlement. As he sat in his office reviewing Paul's latest report, Jared felt something he hadn't experienced since building his first house. The satisfaction of a perfectly planned project about to come to fruition. Angela and Marcos had made the mistake of underestimating a man who built an empire through patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. They were about to learn that Jared Atkinson was not the simple small-town contractor they'd assumed he was. He was a man with resources, connections, and most importantly, the ruthless focus to ensure that those who betrayed him would regret it for the rest of their lives. The hunting season was about to begin, and Jared Atkinson had never missed his target. Chapter 5, The Trap. 2 weeks after the ultrasound revelation, Jared was ready to spring his trap. He'd spent every moment planning meticulously, using the same attention to detail that had made Atkinson Construction the most successful building company in the region. But this time, instead of creating something, he was preparing to systematically destroy the lives of those who betrayed him. The key to Jared's plan was information Paul Hines had uncovered about Marcos's business practices. Jennings Development Group was heavily leveraged with several projects dependent on continued investor confidence. More importantly, Marcos had been cutting corners on environmental regulations and safety standards, violations that could result in criminal charges if properly documented and reported. Jared's first move was strategic and seemingly innocent. He arranged a business meeting with Marcos under the pretense of discussing a potential partnership. Atkinson Construction's reputation in the region made them an attractive partner for any developer, and Marcos eagerly agreed to meet. They met at the Cedar Falls Country Club, a place where Jared held considerable influence as a founding member. Marcos arrived in his BMW dressed in expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The man exuded arrogance, clearly believing he was about to close a lucrative deal with a simple small-town contractor. "Jared, I've heard incredible things about your company," Marcos said, extending his hand with a practiced smile. "I think we could do great things together." Jared shook his hand, noting the soft palm that had never held a hammer or earned an honest callus. "I'm always interested in working with ambitious developers. Tell me about your current projects." Over lunch, Marcos enthusiastically described his various developments, inadvertently revealing details about cost-cutting measures and regulatory shortcuts that Jared mentally catalogued. The man was so confident in his own cleverness that he essentially confessed to numerous violations without realizing it. "I found that sometimes you have to be creative with regulations," Marcos said with a conspiratorial wink. "Environmental impact studies can be interpreted flexibly if you know the right people." Jared nodded thoughtfully, secretly recording the conversation on his phone. "That's very interesting. I'd love to see some of your sites firsthand." They arranged for Jared to visit 3 of Marcos's current projects over the following week. What Marcos didn't know was that Jared was documenting everything. Safety violations, environmental damage, co-violations, and evidence of bribery. Each site visit provided more ammunition for the eventual legal destruction of Jennings Development Group. Meanwhile, Angela's behavior became increasingly erratic. She'd missed her appointment with Dr. Harrington the previous week, claiming she wasn't feeling well. In reality, She was panicking about the timeline discrepancy and had been researching ways to explain it away. She'd even considered claiming the baby was premature, but the ultrasound measurements made that impossible. Her affair with Marcos continued, but their meetings were now filled with anxiety rather than passion. Angela sensed that Jared knew something, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed. Marcos dismissed her concerns, confident that his charm and her husband's trusting nature would protect them. During this time, Jared also began securing his assets. Working with his attorney, Jeffrey Dunn, he restructured Atkinson Construction to protect the company from any potential divorce settlement. Jeffrey was an old friend who helped Jared build his business empire, and he asked no questions when Jared requested aggressive asset protection strategies. "Jared, if you're concerned about liability issues, we can create a more complex corporate structure," Jeffrey suggested during one of their meetings. "Do it," Jared replied. "I want everything protected. The house, the business, Trevor's college fund, everything." Trevor remained a bright spot in Jared's increasingly dark world. The boy continued working on a nursery, painting cartoon characters with the same precision his father applied to construction projects. Watching his son's innocent excitement was both heartbreaking and motivating for Jared. Trevor deserved protection from the chaos that was about to erupt. On Thursday evening, Paul Hines delivered the final piece of evidence Jared needed. Through careful surveillance and strategic information gathering, Paul had discovered that Marcos was planning to leave his wife Samantha within the next month. The plan was for Angela to file for divorce immediately after, claiming irreconcilable differences, and then move to the state capital with a baby once it was born. "They've got it all figured out," Paul reported. "Marcos has already put a deposit on a penthouse apartment downtown. Angela's been researching divorce attorneys who specialize in high-asset cases. They think they're going to walk away with half of everything you've built." Jared smiled coldly as he reviewed the surveillance photos showing Angela and Marcos at the Grandview Hotel earlier that week. They're about to learn that some plans don't survive contact with reality. That night, as Angela slept beside him, Jared finalized his strategy. He would reveal his knowledge of the affair in a way that would maximize damage to both betrayers while protecting himself and Trevor. The timing would be crucial. He needed to coordinate multiple moving parts to ensure neither Angela nor Marcos could escape the consequences of their actions. Phase 1 had been intelligence gathering. Phase 2 had been evidence collection and asset protection. Phase 3, which would begin the following Monday, was total war. And Jared Atkinson had never lost a war he'd chosen to fight. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. As if the universe itself was conspiring to make this perfect day for destruction, Jared woke before dawn, as he had every morning for the past 3 weeks. But today felt different. Today, the planning phase ended and the execution phase began. At 7 a.m., while Angela was still sleeping and Trevor was getting ready for school, Jared made his first call. He contacted the State Environmental Protection Agency and reported the violations he documented at Marcos's construction sites. The evidence was comprehensive. Photographs, recorded conversations, and documentation of illegal dumping and safety violations that put both workers and the public at risk. His second call was to the Internal Revenue Service. Marcos had been bragging about tax strategies that crossed the line into fraud, and Jared had carefully documented every detail. The IRS took such reports seriously, especially when accompanied by substantial evidence. The third call was to Samantha Jennings, Marcos's unsuspecting wife. Jared had debated this decision, but ultimately decided she deserved to know the truth about her husband's double life. "Mrs. Jennings, my name is Jared Atkinson. I have information about your husband that you need to know. Could we meet for coffee this morning?" Samantha's voice was cautious but curious. "I'm not sure what this is about, Mr. Atkinson. Your husband is having an affair with my wife and they're planning to leave their families. I have extensive documentation and I thought you should see it before making any decisions about your future." The silence on the other end lasted nearly 30 seconds before Samantha spoke again. "What kind of documentation?" They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near Samantha's law office. Jared brought copies of everything. Surveillance photos, hotel receipts, text messages that Paul had obtained through various means, and the ultrasound that proved Angela was carrying Marcos's child. Samantha Jennings was an impressive woman, intelligent, composed, and clearly devastated by the evidence, but determined to handle the situation professionally. As a family law attorney, she understood the implications immediately. "This is comprehensive," she said, reviewing the documents. "You've essentially built an airtight case against both of them." "That was the intention," Jared replied. "Your husband has been planning to leave you for my wife. They think they're going to take half of everything I've built to fund their new life together." Samantha's eyes hardened. "Not if I file first." Marcos doesn't know that I've been documenting his suspicious behavior for months. Combined with your evidence, they spent the next hour coordinating their strategies. Samantha would file for divorce that afternoon, seeking full custody of their daughters and requesting forensic accounting of all Marcos's business dealings. Her legal connections would ensure the process moved quickly and aggressively. Meanwhile, Angela was at Dr. Harrington's office for a rescheduled appointment she couldn't avoid any longer. The doctor had insisted on seeing her after she'd missed the previous week's visit. She sat nervously in the waiting room, unaware that her world was already beginning to collapse around her. At noon, Jared returned home to find Angela in the kitchen preparing lunch with nervous energy. She looked up as he entered, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How was your morning?" she asked, her voice artificially bright. "Productive," Jared replied, setting his briefcase on the counter. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made Angela freeze. She'd been dreading this conversation for weeks, but had hoped she could maintain the charade until the baby was born and she could execute her escape plan with Marcos. "What about?" she asked, though she already knew. Jared opened his briefcase and removed a manila folder. He spread its contents across the kitchen table. Surveillance photos, hotel receipts, ultrasound images, and documented evidence of Angela's affair. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Angela's face went white as she stared at the photographs of herself and Marcos at the Grandview Hotel. "Jared, I can explain." "No," he said quietly. "You can't because there is no explanation that justifies what you've done to our family." He sat down across from her, his voice remaining calm and controlled. "I know about Marcos Jennings. I know about your weekly meetings at the Grandview Hotel. I know that the baby you're carrying is his, not mine. And I know about your plan to divorce me and move to the state capital with my money." Angela began crying, but Jared felt no sympathy. The woman sitting across from him was a stranger who'd systematically destroyed 15 years of marriage and trust. "I also know," he continued, "that you've been planning this for months. The hotel receipts go back to January when I was in Denver closing the biggest deal of my career. While I was working 18-hour days to secure our future, you were planning to destroy it." "Jared, please," Angela sobbed. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," he replied. "But here's what you don't know. As of this morning, Marcos Jennings is facing federal environmental violations charges, IRS fraud investigations and a divorce filing from his wife who now has all the evidence of his affair. His business will be destroyed, his assets frozen, and his reputation ruined." Angela's crying stopped as the implications hit her. "What did you do?" "I protected my family and ensured that the people who betrayed us faced appropriate consequences," Jared said. "Marcos won't be taking care of you or your baby. He'll be lucky if he's not in federal prison." As if on cue, Angela's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcos. "Emergency. Need to talk immediately. Everything's falling apart." Jared watched his wife read the message, seeing the exact moment when she realized that her carefully planned escape route had been completely eliminated. The man she betrayed her family for was about to become a liability rather than a salvation. "Pack your things," Jared said, standing up. "You have until Trevor gets home from school to leave this house. After that, all communication goes through attorneys." Angela looked up at him with desperate eyes. "What about the baby? What about our family?" "This isn't our family anymore," Jared replied. "And that isn't my child. You made your choices, Angela. Now you get to live with the consequences." As he walked toward his office to make another round of calls, Jared felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The planning was over. The truth was revealed and justice was being served. Phase 3 had begun and it was proceeding exactly as designed. Chapter 7. The Domino Effect. Within 24 hours of Jared's revelation, the carefully constructed lies that had held Angela and Marcos's affair together crumbled like a house built on a foundation of sand. The speed and thoroughness of the collapse exceeded even Jared's expectations, proving that dishonest people rarely limit their deception to just one area of their lives. Marcos Jennings received the first blow Tuesday morning when federal agents arrived at his office with search warrants related to the environmental violations Jared had reported. The agents seized computers, files, and financial records dating back 3 years. By noon, the story had broken in the state capital's business journal with headlines reading, "Developer faces federal environmental charges." The second blow came that afternoon when Samantha Jennings filed for divorce, accompanied by a motion for emergency asset freezing based on evidence of marital infidelity and financial irregularities. Her filing included Jared's surveillance evidence and additional documentation she'd gathered independently, painting a picture of a man who'd systematically deceived both his family and his business partners. Angela, meanwhile, had spent Monday night at a hotel, calling Marcos repeatedly as she watched their perfect plan disintegrate. When she finally reached him Tuesday evening, the man who promised her a life of luxury and sophistication was barely holding himself together. "Everything's ruined," Marcos said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "The Fed seized everything. Samantha's frozen all our accounts. My investors are backing out. I don't know how this happened so fast." "Jared happened," Angela replied bitterly. "He knew everything. He's been planning this for weeks." "What do you mean he knew everything?" Angela explained the ultrasound revelation and Jared's methodical investigation. As she spoke, Marcos realized the scope of the trap that had been set for them. The simple contractor he dismissed as an easy mark had orchestrated their destruction with precision that would have impressed a military strategist. "We need to figure this out," Marcos said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe we can." "There is no we anymore," Angela interrupted. "You're about to lose everything and I'm pregnant with your child. How exactly are you going to take care of us now?" The conversation ended with Marcos hanging up, leaving Angela alone in a hotel room, surrounded by the wreckage of her choices. The man she betrayed her family for had revealed himself to be exactly what Jared had always been, but in reverse. Where Jared was reliable, Marcos was weak. Where Jared was principled, Marcos was selfish. Where Jared fought for his family, Marcos abandoned his responsibilities at the first sign of trouble. Wednesday brought more devastating news for both betrayers. The IRS announced a full audit of Jennings Development Group with potential criminal charges pending. 3 major investors pulled out of Marcos's projects, citing reputational concerns. His business lawyer informed him that the company would likely be forced into bankruptcy within 60 days. For Angela, the reality of her situation became increasingly clear. Her sister Muriel refused to let her stay at her house, disgusted by Angela's betrayal of Jared and Trevor. Her parents, the once proud, moody family, were mortified by the scandal and offered only cold disapproval rather than support. Chuck Lake, meanwhile, proved his loyalty to Jared by ensuring that word of Angela's affair spread through Cedar Falls' tight-knit business community with surgical precision. By Wednesday evening, everyone who mattered knew exactly what had happened and where the blame lay. Public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive of Jared and contemptuous of Angela's betrayal. Trevor handled the news with the same maturity he applied to everything else. Though Jared could see the pain in his son's eyes. "Is Mom ever coming home?" the boy asked Wednesday night as they worked on a new project in the garage, building a bookshelf for Trevor's room to replace the nursery decorations he'd removed himself. "No," Jared replied honestly. "But we're going to be fine. We've always been a good team, and that's not going to change." "I'm sorry about the baby," Trevor said quietly. "I was really excited about being a big brother." Jared put down his tools and looked at his son. The one part of his marriage that had been genuine and valuable. "You're going to be a great big brother someday when the time is right. This isn't about you, Trevor. You did nothing wrong." Thursday brought the final domino in Jared's carefully orchestrated campaign. Paul Hines delivered evidence that Marcos had been embezzling from his own company to fund his affair with Angela. The expensive hotel suite, the gifts, even Angela's shopping sprees have been paid for with money stolen from investors and business partners. The embezzlement evidence was the final nail in Marcos's professional coffin. Within hours of its delivery to federal investigators, warrants were issued for his arrest. He was picked up Thursday evening at his office, led away in handcuffs as local news cameras captured every moment of his humiliation. Angela watched the arrest on the local news from her hotel room. Her hand resting on her growing belly as she realized the full scope of what her choices had cost. The man she betrayed her family for wasn't just unfaithful and weak. He was a criminal who'd used her as an unwitting accomplice in his schemes. Friday evening, exactly 1 week after Jared had confronted Angela with the evidence of her betrayal, he sat in his office reviewing the results of his campaign. Marcos Jennings was in federal custody, facing charges that would likely result in a decade in prison. His business was bankrupt, his assets seized, and his reputation destroyed beyond repair. Angela was alone, pregnant, and facing a divorce settlement that would leave her with minimal assets thanks to the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten about and the adultery clause that voided most of her financial protections. Her family had disowned her. Her friends had abandoned her. And the man she betrayed her family for was headed to prison. As Jared closed the files on his desk, he felt the satisfaction of a job completed successfully. The planning had been meticulous, the execution flawless, and the results comprehensive. The people who had betrayed him were facing consequences proportionate to their actions. While he and Trevor were free to rebuild their lives on a foundation of truth rather than lies. Phase 3 was complete. It was time to begin Phase 4. Building something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Chapter 8, The New Foundation. 3 months had passed since the ultrasound revelation that changed everything, and Cedar Falls had settled into a new normal that reflected the consequences of choices made and justice served. Winter had arrived early, blanketing the town in snow that seemed to cleanse the air of the scandal that had dominated local conversations through the fall. Marcos Jennings was serving a 7-year federal sentence for embezzlement and environmental crimes. The prosecution had been swift and merciless, with the evidence Jared provided forming the backbone of a case that left no room for plea bargaining. The man who'd once strutted around in expensive suits now wore prison orange and had aged 10 years and 3 months. His twin daughters lived with their mother, who'd successfully claimed most of his remaining assets and moved them to a different state to escape the scandal. Angela had given birth to a daughter in December, a beautiful baby girl she named Kansas. The birth had been difficult both physically and emotionally, as she faced motherhood alone in a small apartment across town, supported only by welfare and the minimal alimony the court had awarded given her adultery. The once proud mayor's daughter now worked part-time at a grocery store, struggling to make ends meet while caring for an infant whose father would be in prison until she was school-aged. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in Cedar Falls that Angela, who dreamed of escaping to a life of luxury and sophistication, had instead found herself trapped in the kind of poverty she'd always looked down upon. Her family had slowly begun speaking to her again. But the relationships remained strained and conditional. The Moody name, once prestigious in Cedar Falls, was now associated with scandal and poor judgment. Jared, meanwhile, had thrived in ways that surprised even him. The divorce had been finalized in January, with Angela receiving far less than she'd expected, thanks to the prenuptial agreement and the evidence of her infidelity. Atkinson Construction had landed 2 major contracts in the aftermath of the scandal. As clients appreciated Jared's integrity and the way he'd handled his personal crisis with dignity, Trevor had adjusted to their new life with remarkable resilience. The boy had initially struggled with anger toward his mother. But Jared had worked carefully to help his son process the betrayal without letting it poison his view of all relationships. They'd grown even closer, spending evenings working on projects and weekends exploring hiking trails around Cedar Falls. "Dad," Trevor said one Saturday morning as they worked on rebuilding the deck behind their house, "do you think you'll ever get married again?" Jared paused his hammering and considered the question. At 40, he felt older and wiser, but not bitter. The betrayal had taught him the value of careful judgment, but it hadn't destroyed his capacity for trust. It had simply made him more selective about who earned it. "Maybe someday," he replied honestly. "But not until you and I have finished building our new life together. We're a pretty good team as we are." Chuck Lake had become an even closer friend through the crisis. His loyalty during the darkest period, cementing a bond that went beyond business partnership. His wife Sarah had taken on something of a protective role toward Trevor, ensuring the boy felt supported by their broader community, even as his nuclear family had been shattered. The reconstruction of Jared's personal life paralleled his approach to construction projects. Methodical, patient, and built to last, he joined the school board, becoming an advocate for programs that supported children from broken homes. He'd started a scholarship fund in Trevor's name, helping local students afford trade school or college. Dr. Harrington had retired in December, selling his practice to a younger physician, but remaining in Cedar Falls. He occasionally joined Jared for coffee, and their conversations often touched on the ethical challenges of truth-telling and the unexpected ways that honesty could lead to justice. "You did the right thing," the old doctor had said during one of their conversations. "It took courage to tell you the truth, but it would have been worse for everyone if I'd stayed silent." Including Angela, Jared had replied. Living a lie was destroying her, even if she couldn't see it. The truth gave her a chance to face reality and maybe become a better person. By spring, Angela had indeed begun showing signs of personal growth, though it came at a tremendous cost. The struggle of single motherhood and financial hardship had stripped away the entitlement and superficiality that had characterized her personality for years. She worked hard at her job, cared devotedly for Cora, and had begun attending counseling sessions to understand how she'd made such destructive choices. She occasionally saw Jared around town. Cedar Falls was too small to avoid each other completely, but their interactions were brief and polite. The anger had faded, replaced by something closer to pity on his part and regret on hers. They'd both moved beyond the hatred and hurt to a place where they could coexist peacefully while living entirely separate lives. Trevor had asked to meet his half-sister, and after careful consideration, Jared had arranged supervised visits. The boy was curious about Cora, but clear that Angela's choices had consequences that affected their relationship permanently. He was polite but distant during visits, protective of his loyalty to his father while maintaining basic human decency toward his mother. As spring turned to summer, Jared reflected on the year that had changed everything. The betrayal had initially felt like the end of the world, but it had actually been the end of a lie that had been slowly poisoning his life for years. The truth had been devastating, but ultimately liberating, allowing him to build something authentic and lasting. Standing on his rebuilt deck one evening, watching Trevor practice baseball in the backyard, Jared felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Complete contentment with his life as it actually was rather than as he'd imagined it to be. The foundation was solid now, built on truth, integrity, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son who'd survived the worst together and emerged stronger. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 2 years after the ultrasound that revealed the truth, Cedar Falls had fully absorbed the lessons of the Angela Atkinson scandal, and the town had moved on with the collective wisdom that comes from witnessing justice served comprehensively and fairly. The story had become something of a local legend, a cautionary tale about the consequences of betrayal and the rewards of integrity. Marcos Jennings remained in federal prison with 5 years left on his sentence. Reports from his ex-wife Samantha indicated that he'd become a model prisoner, finally facing the reality of his actions and their consequences. His daughters were thriving under their mother's care, having moved across the country where they could build new lives free from their father's legacy of dishonesty. Angela had continued her slow journey toward redemption. Though it remained a difficult path marked by the consequences of her choices, she'd been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store. A modest achievement that represented genuine progress in rebuilding her life. Cora was a healthy, happy 2-year-old who brought moments of joy to Angela's otherwise challenging existence. The relationship between Angela and Trevor had evolved into something civil but distant. The boy, now 16 and increasingly mature, visited his mother occasionally, but made it clear that his primary loyalty remained with his father. He'd grown into a young man who embodied Jared's best qualities, integrity, work ethic, and loyalty, while avoiding the bitterness that might have consumed someone who'd experienced such family trauma at younger age. She made her choices. Trevor had said to his father one evening as they discussed whether to attend Angela's graduation from a community college business program. "I can respect that she's trying to do better without forgetting what she put us through." They attended the graduation ceremony, sitting in the back and leaving immediately afterward. Angela had looked across the auditorium and nodded in acknowledgement, understanding that their presence represented a form of closure rather than reconciliation. She was grateful for their witness to her small achievement, even knowing that the damage to their relationship could never be fully repaired. Jared had found love again, though he'd approached it with the careful deliberation that now characterized all his major decisions. Pearl Downing was a widow who moved to Cedar Falls to be closer to her adult children. She was kind, intelligent, and shared Jared's values of honesty and hard work. Their relationship had developed slowly over 18 months, with both understanding the importance of building something genuine rather than rushing into commitment. Trevor approved of Pearl, appreciating her respect for his relationship with his father and her understanding that she wasn't trying to replace his mother, but rather to add something positive to their lives. The three of them had formed a comfortable family unit that honored the past while building toward the future. Atkinson Construction had grown dramatically, expanding into 3 states and employing over 400 people. The company's reputation for integrity had become its greatest asset, with clients specifically seeking them out because of Jared's character. The scandal that could have destroyed him had instead become proof of his principles and judgment. Chuck Lake had become a full partner in the business. Their friendship deepened by the trials they'd weathered together. Chuck's wife Sarah had developed a close relationship with Pearl, creating a social circle that supported both couples while respecting their individual needs and boundaries. Dr. Harrington, though retired, remained a respected figure in Cedar Falls. Often cited as an example of professional integrity who chose truth over comfort when faced with a difficult situation. His courage in revealing Angela's deception had prevented years of additional deception and allowed everyone involved to face reality and make better choices. Paul Hines, the private investigator who helped Jared gather evidence, had become something of a local celebrity. With other betrayed spouses seeking his services based on his thorough and professional work on the Atkinson case, he developed a reputation for discretion and competence that made him the go-to investigator for sensitive family matters throughout the region. On a warm Saturday evening in June, exactly 3 years after the ultrasound revelation, Jared stood on his deck, the same deck he'd rebuilt during the darkest period of his life, surrounded by the people who had proven their loyalty and worth. Chuck and Sarah were there with their children. Pearl was helping Trevor prepare for his senior year of high school. Jeffrey Dunn, his attorney, had stopped by with his family for the barbecue that had become an annual celebration of survival and renewal. As Jared watched this gathering of genuine relationships built on truth and mutual respect, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately saved him from a life built on lies. The pain that had seemed unbearable had led to growth and wisdom he wouldn't have gained any other way. "Any regrets?" Pearl asked, joining him to deck railing as the sun set over Cedar Falls. Jared considered the question seriously, as he did all questions about the past 3 years. About trusting too much initially? No. About how I handled the truth when I learned it? No. About the consequences that followed? No. He looked across the yard where Trevor was showing Chuck's youngest son how to properly swing a baseball bat. The same patient instruction Jared had received from his own father decades ago. The cycle of positive influence continued, unbroken by the betrayal that had threatened to poison everything good in his life. The only regret I have, Jared continued, is that it took a crisis to show me the difference between the life I thought I wanted and the life I actually needed. But even that wasn't really a mistake. It was education. As the evening wounded down and their friends departed, Jared felt the deep satisfaction that comes from surviving the worst and building something better from the wreckage. Angela and Marcos had paid the full price for their betrayal. Not through revenge, but through the natural consequences of their choices and the justice that follows when truth replaces lies. The foundation was solid now, built on bedrock rather than sand. Whatever the future held, Jared knew he was ready for it. Surrounded by people whose love was genuine and whose loyalty had been tested and proven. Justice had been served, not through hatred or bitterness, but through the simple act of refusing to live a lie and insisting that actions have consequences. In Cedar Falls, the story of Jared Attinson had become more than local legend. It was proof that integrity, patience, and careful judgment could triumph over deception, betrayal, and selfishness. The man who'd lost everything had gained something more valuable. A life built on truth, surrounded by people worthy of trust, and anchored by the unshakable knowledge that he'd faced the worst and emerged victorious. The ultrasound that had revealed the lie had ultimately delivered the truth that set everyone free. And in the end, that truth had been worth every moment of pain it had cost to uncover. And there you have it. After listening to today's story, perhaps some new questions have emerged in your mind. Or maybe certain old memories have resurfaced. Every single day, fresh stories are born from real experiences and moments, and they bring us all together. Each person has their own unique path in life, and we all try to make sense of the world in our own way. Moments like these remind us that we're all human, sometimes joyful, sometimes melancholic, and always discovering something new. If this story resonated with you, feel free to share it with your friends. Your thoughts and feedback mean the world to us, as they inspire us to create even more meaningful content. Every story carries its own unique perspective, and our mission is to understand everyone's viewpoint and make our content diverse and relatable. Stories like this one help us realize that life's journey is different for each of us. And through hearing other people's stories, we gain new insights. You're welcome to share your own stories with us too. Your experiences matter to us just as much. And if you found value in this video, please let us know. We strive to create content that enriches your thinking and offers fresh perspectives each time. Even if you've watched this video before, your feedback remains important. With every comment and suggestion, we can refine our content and deliver new angles to our audience. Today, what we witnessed was merely a glimpse of the countless stories shared around the globe. It's a testament to how we all seek to understand life by exchanging our experiences with one another. This video was simply one example of how we attempt to connect through storytelling, exploring the many facets of life. We hope to keep sharing stories that help us all learn and evolve together. Thank you for spending your time with us, and stay tuned for more stories coming your way. If you haven't done so already, please like and follow for more compelling content. Your support fuels our passion, and we'll continue working hard to bring you thought-provoking and heartwarming narratives. Until next time, take care and stay curious.